find you?
Mhm. Well, physically, I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico right now. But I'm a transformative and spiritual life coach and shamanic practitioner. My website is aclearmind.com. I'm also on Instagram, and you can find me at GNS Thoughts, GN's Thoughts. So, because our reality is made up with our thoughts and what we're thinking in the moment, every moment that exists. So, that's where you can find me. I do a lot of group work, personal work, online, in person, a lot of different things. But that's not what I always was. I transitioned into this profession. I was in the soccer industry for a long time and owned an indoor soccer arena, coached soccer. So I work with athletes. That's kind of my ideal situation, is to blend the work I've done as a transformative life coach and shamanism into working with soccer players, especially, but I work with anybody really. And I love working with parents and love working with teenagers as well. So, the journey has just kind of taken me to where I am today. It's been quite a journey.
Perfect. So, from the beginning of your journey, you mentioned soccer. How did you get involved in that, and how did you ultimately decide to transition from that to what you're doing today?
Well, I got into soccer. I mean, it's in my blood. I'm half Brazilian and half Egyptian, and as you know, the Brazilians are that's in the culture. And I grew up. I was born in Brazil, but grew up in Columbus, Ohio. And I still remember the phone call when I was 6 years old. My best friend's dad called me and said he was going to make a soccer team, and asked me if I wanted to be on it. So that was kind of my beginning journey of soccer, although it was always there culturally. And eventually, played soccer, started coaching soccer, and opened up this indoor soccer arena that was sitting empty for a few years, and that I had played there in high school and a little bit in college. And best advice my dad gave me, because I knew I wanted to run a business, but I didn't know what. He said, well, if you blend your hobby with a business, you will love what you're doing. And I said, well, my friends and I have been talking about reopening this old indoor arena. And then boom, we went and did it. And it just kind of like was totally divine timing. The universe was just welcoming this to happen. And it was really amazing. And the community got behind it. And just, it was in perfect alignment. So, was coaching soccer. I was in my early 20s and coaching soccer and running this indoor. And then eventually I met my future wife. And I remember she came in, she's never played soccer before, was decided to join this soccer team with some friends of hers. And then this spunky little 7-year-old girl came with her. And I was just drawn to both of them, just really energetically. It wasn't anything physical at all. It was like just something inside me said, I'm supposed to be in their lives. There's something about these two. And so I started chatting it up with her daughter, who's now my daughter. Her name is Ryan. And I just really liked her energy. And then eventually started talking to her mom, and one thing led to another, and got married. So, and that's when the journey really began, with learning a lot about myself. I was coaching a very high level youth soccer team at the time. We were one of the best teams in the country, in the US, top 10 in the country. And, it was a lot of traveling, and I was coaching these boys to really push their limits and to instill discipline in them, and intensity, and just so much focus. And I had never raised a child before, and so here I am, then thrust into not just one relationship but two relationships, because there was the relationship with her mom, but then of course the relationship with her as well. And that's when I really started to learn. For me, I was always looking forward to being a father, and I was doing such a good job being a coach. I felt, well, I was having results as well. But I said, I can just do this as a parent, same kind of mentality. And boy, was I wrong. You know, there was, I learned a lot of lessons along the way, because, I saw this young girl who was being mothered by a single mom. Ryan's dad had passed away when she was 2 years old. And so, here I was, all of a sudden, the dad, there was no other father in her life. And so I said, okay, I was kind of observing, and that was my strength of a coach, of like seeing what my players needed most. And what I saw was like, oh, she needs discipline, she needs to be able to focus. And so I was doing that. And then, when it was well received at the beginning, and then all of a sudden she got more comfortable with me, and then it wasn't so well received, and has a warrior spirit. And she wasn't afraid, even at a young age, to kind of speak her mind. And for me, if my players ever did that, then of course I would speak my mind and make them run or something. Obviously I didn't make her run, but I would kind of push back, and we had this kind of like back and forth intensity relationship over the next few years, where there was a lot of love, but then there was also some conflict. And and I tried to adjust, and, was trying to learn how to be a better parent, and read books and was implementing them, because my personality is I want to be the best version of me in all categories that come into my life. So whether it's being a coach, a business owner, a parent, whatever. So, I was learning this stuff, and kind of fast forward a few years, she kind of went through a real dark night of the soul, and came out, just a lot of stuff came out about abuse from the past. And she grew up the first part of her life in East Texas, and just in the society there, the culture there where she was from, there's just a lot of tragedy, a lot of trauma, a lot of abuse. And I didn't know this stuff, and even her mom at the time didn't know quite the extent of this. And there was just a lot of friction going on in the house, and her mom and I had a biological son, and that kind of added to the intensity of the experience, because then the attention wasn't just on her anymore. So she was having to kind of like maneuver through, we were all maneuvering through a new experience, having a new child, and they were 13 years apart. So she was having to kind of deal with like us trying to raise a baby who wasn't sleeping, and then she was going through a really tough time as an adolescent. And I knew, I have a background in counseling, I have a master's in counseling, so luckily we had her in therapy, because I could start to see that she needed some very early on. So she was with a great therapist, and we all went in, and she was telling us about some things from her past that we didn't know. And, so we all had to adjust to this new information of different trauma that she was experiencing, or that she had experienced as a child. And, it was very hard for us. So we were dealing, with a lot of emotional stuff coming up from her, and then our son wasn't sleeping. It was just a really intense time in our family. And she eventually left the house. She just basically, it was too much for her to handle emotionally. And we knew, we did a lot of personal work. We became life coaches, and we're working with a coach ourselves. And we kind of knew that we just had to let her go. And she was luckily she was out of the house, kind of bouncing around different places. And, we still paid for her phone and kept her room open and said, "You're welcome to come back whenever." And luckily she was still open to going to therapy, and she transferred to a new therapist because her old therapist retired. And that was kind of the biggest lesson that I learned, was through that therapist. And it was a DBT therapist. And So there was parental involvement. So her mom would go to the parent meetings, and then, we would go to family therapy, and then Ryan had her own therapy. And the probably the biggest lesson, and I spread this to as many people as I can in my work, whether it's a relationship with a child or with a partner of some sort, or really anywhere. I started using this even in my business to kind of um, help soccer players chill out when they're really heated. And that's the power of validation. And, we went to family therapy, and her therapist gave us a list of invalidating statements. And she said, okay, go ahead and read these and mark off whichever ones that you've either heard or that you've said. And I was going down the list, and I was like, oh my goodness, and I realized how much I was invalidating her experience. And, it can be anywhere from things like, oh, don't feel that way, or you're making a big deal out of nothing, or, you're being so dramatic. And there's so many simple things sometimes, that we say to anybody, especially children, because, we don't want to deal with their emotions, or we want them to change their emotions. And so then we say these things, right? Because really we're uncomfortable. And
One
it's,
thing, Gabe, that I will add to what you just said is you mentioned invalidating how they feel. And I think many times what we do as not only as people, right, but as parents, we're a little bit more dismissive of our children's situation, their experiences, and their feelings because we're the protectors, right? We're the providers. We're like, oh, you're not really feeling that because this is how the situation is. Or we may look at them and say that, or in our mind, we think they're too young to be experiencing these things or to understand that this is what they're really going through. So when you were told and you were presented with invalidating terms and you had to understand, and then you came to the realization like, I am saying some of these things. I am invalidating her experience. How was that for you, realizing that was something that you were a part of, or at the very least contributing to?
mm-hmm. I mean, at first, I think this is a normal response. I felt a lot of shame, about how I was communicating with her, and there was a really big moment where I all of a sudden, some things that she had said for a while, for maybe a year or two, really stuck to me, that she was right. And she used to say, when we would argue, she would say, "You're not listening to me." And that is the key. That's right there, is invalidating, right? It's like this child is telling me I'm not listening to her. And my response at the time was like, no, I'm listening to the words that, I'm listening to you. I'm just not telling you what you want to hear, So, I think whenever we have these big kind of aha moments, it can be hit with like shame and how we used to be, you know. But then, that quickly moved forward into, okay, I'm going to get better at this. Because, again, I'm all about mastery for myself and wanting to be the best version of me. So, I had to really learn then how to change my language, which in order to do that, you have to be aware of the situation. You have to prepare yourself, essentially, like, okay, hey, when things get heated, I'm going to validate her feelings and, say, okay, yes, I understand you feel that way, that was a really big moment in my life. And that has really changed the whole outlook on how I communicate with people, especially with my son, and to validate him, because we're never wrong about how we feel. And I think so many times parents especially are like, no, I mean, you shouldn't feel that way, but people do, especially when it comes to, if somebody, for me, I had some really challenging moments in my childhood. So, because of that, I grew and I became very resilient. So then I was just assuming that everyone else should feel the same, like, well, no, your life is easy compared to what I had to deal with.
For those who are watching on Facebook, YouTube, and my social media, please stay tuned, share, and subscribe for more incredible interviews like the one we have with my new best friend, Gabe. And we will be back for more. So stay tuned, everyone.